Then we come back and we'll do some more testing on the new GT car. You notice I'm calling it a GT car. I don't like to call it GT2 because everybody thinks, well, you move down from GT1, normal. The reason that we're going to GT2 is that in 2010, around the world, the rules change for GT racing. And GT racing is going to kind of take on what currently exists today as GT2. It's going to be a whole new segment, more production relevant. The cars are going to be safer. What's happened is, because we have gone off and done this 11-year GT1 thing, cars have gotten way too fast. And the sanctioning body, governing sanctioning body, the FIA, who governs Le Mans, has said to the organizers there, you have to bring speeds down, all your cars, LMP1, LMP2, GT1, GT2. So what they've done from a constructor standpoint is kind of rewritten the rules a little bit. So we're building a new car that meets the new world-class GT rules. Essentially, it's 100 less horsepower, so it'll be 500 horsepower rather than 6. It's got a little smaller aero package on it, so it's a smaller front splitter, smaller rear wing. We run steel brakes rather than carbon brakes, and the weight on the car goes up just a little bit. So the performance, probably, you know, across the board, you look at something maybe in the neighborhood of, if you looked at a lap time of somewhere between 5 and 10%. But that brings that car right back down into the safety levels that the organizers are looking for. So quite frankly, we're just preparing for the future, what we hope is a long and storied future for Corvette. And here in the United States, I'm working very hard to convince the sanctioning body to just call it GT, not GT2. Just call it GT Racing, because that's where everybody's going to be. You went through the list. I mean, it's Aston Martin, it's Jaguar, it's BMW, it's Ferrari, it's Viper, it's Porsche. For the first time in my racing history, which is much longer than I will ever admit to, we're going to have more brands, more marques, and more factory competition in this form of racing than has ever existed before. This is a very, very exciting time for racing sports cars. Will we be at a disadvantage? We will be initially. There's a thing in Europe called performance balancing. They do it a little better job than what the ALMS tried to do to us a few years back with Aston. They actually use facts and figures and science rather than trying to manage the outcome of the race based on promises that they made to other manufacturers. So Corvette, in and of itself, as we have run everybody out of the GT1 class, that hasn't gone unnoticed by the organizers in Europe. So we will have in 2010 probably a restrictor that's a little bit smaller than what we really need to be competitive. But in order to get that changed, we're going to have to, you know, take a few lumps along the way until we can demonstrate to them, you know, what we have to have. So yes, we will be, just because big 2-valve V8s are penalized a little bit because the guys that have the little squawky 4 cylinders, you know, are afraid of ground pound and American Thunder. So we'll start slow, work our way up. We're a little disadvantaged, but nothing we can't handle. Yes. Cost. Yeah. Again, it's we talk about economics. I've tried to explain to them from a safety standpoint and obviously from a performance standpoint. But it's undeniably more cheap, or less expensive to run steel brakes throughout the course of a year. But we're a pretty sophisticated team from a technology standpoint, obviously from an organizational standpoint. Even the best teams in Europe have trouble, I'm not bragging, it's just fact. They have trouble matching up to us, and it levels the playing field when everybody's on steel brakes, and it's far less expensive, so it makes racing a lot more attractive to a lot more teams. But that's the only reason, just cost. We don't have to use stock body panels, but the shape of the body has to conform. Now, ZR1 is what we're going to homologate. The car that races right now is Z06 homologated. ZR1 will be the homologation on the GT, the new GT car. And when you look at it, it will look exactly like a ZR1. Now, the rear deck, the hood, the fenders are exactly the same size and proportion. What we did when we built the GT1 car, because the rules allowed it, we kind of built a 5/4 scale Corvette. I don't know if you noticed this, but the headlamps, although they took the exact same shape as a Corvette, were probably 15% bigger to fit what we did by making the top of the fenders wider, and there were no flares. So when you looked at the side of the car, it kind of had the same profile as a street car. They don't allow that in GT2. So when you see the new car, it actually has, it looks a little narrower. It's not. It looks narrower. But it has fender flares on it rather than us putting a section in the top of the fender. So the actual profile on the side, it actually looks pretty cool. It's a little racier with this whole flare thing.
Actually, he's understating it. I think it looks friggin' awesome when you see it. I mean, the first time I saw it down at the shop, it was like, ugh, ugh, you know, I mean, it's got, a lot of you know what Coke bottle is in the shape of a car. It's got a lot of Coke bottle in it, and it is so sexy, you just won't believe it. Wait till you see it, it's just awesome.
Right down in the middle.
Are they still yellow?
Well, the final graphics package hasn't been determined yet, and oddly enough, on the morning of May 4th, I'm sitting down with Kirk Benyon and his design team, and they have a series of new graphics that we're going to look at and make a decision on what we're going to do. I will tell you this, that yellow will be the predominant color. We have a tremendous amount of equity built up in that, and it's not just here in the United States, it's around the world. And you know, there's a whole legion of thought that says, Jesus, time for a change, you've had this for a long time, da-da-da-da-da, and that all has merit. But when you come down to selling cars and who you represent, what you're doing, and plus they photograph like crazy. If you've ever looked at photographs on a racetrack, and you know, there'll be a long shot, and you'll see 20 cars on the racetrack, you don't have any trouble picking out what we are in that picture. Photographers love that, magazine publishers love it, art people love it. So when we look at all the ancillary stuff that we're able to achieve by maintaining that velocity yellow color, that will be the base color on the car, but I can assure you graphically, they'll be very distinguished in the way they look.
The GT1 right now runs the 7-liter 427. It's a GT car. Can you speak to what cubic inches it's going to run?
Sure. For the remainder of this year, all right, we're going to be running the same engine we're running now with a different crankshaft in it. So it's a 6-liter version of our 7-liter engine. All right. We'll finish the year out with that. Then in 2010, they don't allow 6 liters anymore. 5.5 liters is the max. We can't, this motor develops so much torque right now. That's what happened at Long Beach. We just twisted the drive flange. It just tore it apart. Too much traction, too good a racetrack, too much power. We need a new part. But the new cars, we're currently working on a new 5.5-liter engine, which is the new LS3, I think, I don't know how they get that. They start out with LS1, they go to LS7, then back to LS3. I've never figured out LS. But at any rate, it'll be the new LS3 version. It'll be 5.5 liters, and in 2010 we'll debut that engine.
Is K-Tech still involved with that?
K-Tech is involved in our engine that we're going to be running for the remainder of this year. At that point in time, it switches, and it's going to GM Powertrain, the Wixom facility that builds the ZR1 motors.
They're going to build the race engines too?
They're going to build the race engines, yes, they are.
On the GT cars, are there things that have to be stock parts?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Such as?
Well, right now it has to be a windshield. You know, we're going to have to run a glass windshield this year. Next year we can go back to Lexington. Okay. The chassis has to be right out of Bowling Green. So we get them right from Bowling Green, bring them up. There's a lot more chassis componentry that has to be production. After that, it pretty much is free because the suspension can change a little bit because you got bigger tires and wheels. But essentially, and the engine has to be production block, production head. So the fundamentals of the car stay production. It's just that it looks so much more production in the way the body's made and the shape of the car and all that.
One example is the requirement for an aluminum frame, because that's what's in the ZR1. So that's interesting and created its own technical challenges that the guys have stepped up to understand how you do an aluminum frame with a steel roll cage. So thank goodness we have the best race engineering group in the world.
That's a fact. When we debut this, we'll talk more about how we've done that because it'll be written up in technical magazines how we've done this. Yes, sir.